What would you do if your own mother-in-law locked you in a barn during labor, hoping you'd die, only for a stranger to save you? Grace was left alone, locked in the barn by her cruel mother-in-law, Mildred, as she went into labor. With her husband miles away and no one to help, a mysterious man, Wyatt, showed up to save her. But this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a battle to bring Mildred to justice, as secrets about Wyatt's past and his connection to Mildred came to light. Stay tuned to watch how Grace fights for her future. My channel's struggling, so if you're intrigued, please comment 1 to help me out. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Subscribe to see how it ends, and I wish you all good health. I went into labor and pleaded with my mother-in-law for help. Instead of offering assistance, she dragged me to the barn and locked me inside, coldly saying, "I doubt your baby will survive." My husband was miles away, sent by her to handle a fabricated emergency. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, and when I saw who was coming, I couldn't believe my eyes. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. Welcome to Revenge Scales, where justice always finds its way. My name is Grace, and though I knew my mother-in-law, Mildred, couldn't stand me, I had always believed that somewhere beneath her icy, calculating exterior, there might still be a shred of humanity. I never imagined her cruelty could go this far. I was wrong. It was a sweltering, suffocating day, and the air inside the house felt even heavier with Billy's absence. He'd left in a rush that morning, sent by his mother to deal with some issue involving a neighbor. Something about it didn't feel right, but I was too weak to question it. 8 months pregnant, every breath felt like a struggle. Then my water broke, and panic hit like a wave. Warm liquid streamed down my legs, followed by a sharp pain that cut across my belly. I grabbed the table for support, my body trembling as I cried out for help. That's when she appeared, her footsteps echoing in the hallway, each one colder than the last. "My water just broke. Please help me." My voice quivered as I begged. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing as if she were calculating her next move. To my relief, she grabbed my arm. I thought she was going to take me to the hospital, but instead, her grip tightened a cruel, unyielding force. "Come with me," she said, her voice cold as ice, sending a chill through my veins. She pulled me out of the house, ignoring my frantic pleas. My legs were weak, the pain stealing my breath, and as we walked, I realized where she was taking me. The barn. The same barn Billy always claimed was abandoned, used only for old, rusted tools. "Mildred, what are you doing? I need a doctor!" I screamed, but she didn't answer. When we reached the barn, she flung the door open and shoved me inside. I stumbled, crashing to the cold, dusty floor, the grit clinging to my sweaty skin. Before I could even push myself up, I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. "I don't think your son will survive," she said, her tone disturbingly casual, as if she were commenting on the weather. Then her footsteps faded, leaving me alone in the dark. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the emptiness around me. The barn felt suffocating, the air thick with the musty scent of mold and rotting wood. I crawled across the floor, searching for anything that could offer me some help, but all I found were broken boards and rusted tools. The cold crept over me, as if it was part of the darkness itself. As the hours dragged on, desperation gnawed at me. Hunger twisted my stomach, but it was the fear that overwhelmed me. Every sharp pain in my belly felt like a cruel reminder that my baby was fighting, just like I was. I didn't know if we would survive. My thoughts became a chaotic mix of silent tears and desperate prayers. Then I heard footsteps again. They were weak, hesitant, as if whoever was coming wasn't sure. My body went rigid. Was it Mildred returning to finish what she had started, or was it someone coming to save me? I held my breath, bracing for whatever was about to unfold. When the door creaked open, my heart skipped a beat. A beam of light from a flashlight blinded me, and all I could make out was the silhouette of a tall, scruffy man dressed in worn clothes with an unkempt beard. My pulse raced, fear clawed at me, torn between the hope that someone was here to help and the dread that it could be Mildred or one of her accomplices. "Are you okay?" His voice was deep, tinged with hesitation. He stepped closer, tilting his head as if trying to understand what he was seeing. I'm trapped here. Catherine locked me in, I whispered, my throat dried, the pain in my belly escalating. I'm pregnant. My water broke, I tried to explain, but before I could say anything else, a wave of sharp pain coursed through my body. I screamed involuntarily, gripping the ground, unable to move. Calm down, calm down. He rushed to my side, leaving the flashlight on the ground so it illuminated the area. You're in labor. His expression shifted, eyes wide, but not with pain. Panic. It was something more complex, like he was preparing to face the inevitable. No, not here, I groaned, tears streaming down my face. I can't do this, I can't. You don't have a choice, miss, he said, kneeling beside me, his voice suddenly firm. Listen to me, I've done this before. It's going to be okay, but you need to trust me. I looked at him incredulous. He'd done this before? How? Nah, it doesn't matter now, he replied, pulling a small knife from his pocket and cleaning it with a cloth. What matters is that I'm going to help you. Breathe deeply and listen to me. We're going to bring this baby into the world. Panic and pain consumed me, but his voice had an odd authority, a calmness that contradicted his disheveled appearance. Wyatt, as he introduced himself, moved with such confidence, as if he was born to handle chaos. He made a bed out of hay and his coat. Now listen to me, he said, his tone clear and reassuring. When the next contraction comes, push with everything you've got. Time seemed to stretch as the contractions came in waves of overwhelming pain, each one stronger than the last. Wyatt spoke to me the entire time, giving clear, firm instructions, yet there was a care in his voice that I hadn't expected from a stranger. You can do this, Grace. Just one more time, breathe deep, we're almost there. And then, with my loudest scream, the piercing cry of a baby filled the barn. Relief and emotion flooded me all at once, tears running down my face as Wyatt cradled my baby in his firm, calloused hands. It's a boy, he said, a smile softening his hardened face. He cleaned the baby with a cloth, then wrapped him in his coat before placing him in my arms. You were amazing, he said as I held my son, still in disbelief that he was finally here. Wyatt sat beside me. We need to get out of here. Catherine won't stop, but I promise as long as I'm here, no one will hurt you. For a brief moment, as I looked at the mysterious man and the baby in my arms, I almost believed he was right. The sound of my baby's cry filled the air so raw, so pure. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. As I held him close, all the fear, all the despair, melted away. He was so small, his warm, rosy skin pressing against mine, but that fragile peace didn't last. A voice deep inside me kept whispering, relentless and insistent, that Mildred wouldn't give up so easily. I had to escape before she realized I was still alive. Wyatt crouched in front of me, wiping his hands with what little remained of a cloth, already soiled with dirt and sweat. He looked at me, a mixture of relief and caution in his gaze. You need to rest, but we can't stay here. If Catherine finds out the baby was born, she won't stop until she finishes what she started. His dark eyes held something I couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just concern. There was anger, too. Something old, something buried deep. But there was no time for questions. All I could feel was the crushing exhaustion, dragging me down, even though every fiber of my body screamed for rest. You've done this before, haven't you? I whispered, barely able to muster the strength to speak. Help someone give birth? Wyatt avoided my gaze for a long moment, as though the question unsettled him. Yeah, he said, his voice flat. But it doesn't matter now. What matters is getting out of here alive. He didn't elaborate, but his words carried weight, something heavy that I couldn't ignore. Wyatt stood, gathering what little he could from the barn some burlap sacks, which he quickly fashioned into an extra blanket for me and the baby. When he finished, he extended his hand. Can you walk? I shook my head, the exhaustion settling into my bones like an anchor. Carefully, I held the baby close to my chest and leaned on Wyatt for support. Each step felt like a battle, but the instinct to protect my child burned brighter than the pain. Outside, the night air bit at my skin. The pale moonlight illuminated the path between the fields as Wyatt led me away from the farmhouse. I glanced back at the dark silhouette of the building. It should have been a sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison, a trap closing in on me. "Where are we going?" I asked, struggling to match his pace. "There's a place not far from here, an old abandoned cabin on the edge of the forest. It's the only place I can think of," he said, his voice steady and focused on the path ahead, never once looking back. As we walked, exhaustion seeped deeper into my body. My arms burned from holding the baby, and my feet felt like they were dragging through thick mud. When the cabin finally came into view, I could hardly believe it. It was small, weathered, its wooden walls sagging with age. Wyatt pushed the door open with a single shove and quickly made a space for us on the floor. He started a small fire with twigs, the warmth finally offering some comfort to my aching body. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, watching him gently rock the baby. I wasn't just curious, I needed to understand why someone, especially someone who seemed to carry so much of his own pain, would risk so much for a stranger. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes darkening before he spoke. "Because I know what it's like to be destroyed by someone like Mildred. I know how far they'll go, how they won't stop until there's nothing left. She won't stop until she has everything, but this time, she won't win." Wyatt handed the baby back to me and I held him tightly, feeling my heart settle for a moment. As I stared at the flickering fire, I realized this was just the beginning. I couldn't run from this anymore. Mildred hadn't just tried to take my baby. She had tried to erase me completely. And that I could never forgive. As the firelight danced in the shadows of the cabin, an idea began to form in my mind. I didn't know how, but I had to make sure Mildred would never hurt anyone again. Wyatt, with his contained rage and untold stories, seemed to have the answers I needed. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. He looked at me, a determined glint in his eyes. "Now we plan how we're going to bring her down." And in that moment, I realized my fight had just begun. Wyatt got up in the middle of the night, feeding the fire with more twigs. I watched him in silence, the baby nestled in my arms, breathing rhythmically. My mind was so overwhelmed that sleep seemed impossible. The idea of going back to that farm and facing Mildred again made my stomach turn. But I knew I had to find a way to end this, not for me, but for the baby who now depended on me for everything. "You still haven't told me why you hate my mother-in-law." I broke the silence, my voice low but firm. Wyatt turned his head toward me, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. For a moment, I thought he was going to ignore the question. "She took everything from me," he said, sitting down on the floor, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was just an ordinary man, working the land, building my life. I had a wife, a little boy, and I believed that hard work was enough. But Mildred is like poison. She accused me of theft, forged evidence, and destroyed my reputation. I ended up in prison for something I never did, and when I got out, my wife was gone, taking my son with her. I never saw them again." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. Wyatt wasn't just helping me. He had his own wound, one that Mildred had caused. "And you never tried to get revenge?" I asked. "I tried," he answered, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But Mildred is smart. She has influence, money, and knows how to manipulate the people around her. I had no way to fight back, until now." His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I realized he saw in me a chance to right the wrongs of the past. "How do you think we can defeat her?" I asked. "She controls everything, even Billy, my husband." My voice faltered as I mentioned his name, thinking of how blind he seemed to his mother's manipulation. Or maybe he just chose to ignore it. Wyatt shook his head. "She made a mistake this time. You survived, and more than that, now we have something that can bring her down." He pointed to his backpack and pulled out a bundle of weathered papers. "These documents are the key. They prove her schemes, fraud, bribery, and even false accusations like the one that ruined my life." "That's not enough," I said. "Do you know how to escape? She's always known how to get away with it. We need more. He said, we need her to confess. Bentham handed me a small metallic object, an old recorder. You'll be the bait, he said. My breath quickened. You want me to go back to that house? After everything she did to me, and what if she tries it again? Wyatt placed a firm hand on my shoulder, his gaze locking with mine, carrying a weight of seriousness that made my skin prickle. She'll try, but this time you won't be alone. I'll be close enough to step in if anything goes wrong, and with the recordings we have, the police will finally have the evidence they need to take her down. The enormity of the plan swirled in my mind. The thought of facing Mildred terrified me, but Wyatt was right. We couldn't keep running. We couldn't let her get away with it. I looked down at my son, asleep in my arms, and a quiet strength began to rise within me, strength I didn't know I had. All right, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Let's end this. Benjamin nodded in approval. Tomorrow at dawn, we return to the farm. You just need to make her talk. I'll handle the rest. The hours of the night stretched on as we rehearsed the plan, covering every possible outcome. Fear still lingered in my chest, but it was now tempered with something stronger: resolve. By the time morning came, I lay wrapped in a thin blanket, restless. The fire's weak glow cast a soft light over Wyatt's face, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse of the forest, ever watchful. I knew that the next day would change our lives, but deep down I prayed this time. Mildred would finally face the consequences of her actions. The sun had barely risen when Benjamin and I approached the farm. Each step I took quickened my pulse. The shadows of the trees seemed to reach out, their long fingers trying to hold me back. Wyatt moved ahead, calm and measured, while I clutched my baby close, his steady breathing grounding me. Remember the plan, Wyatt murmured, pausing just before we reached the house. He turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. Make her talk. Don't hesitate to provoke her. Her pride will be her undoing. Though my hands trembled, I knew that my son's safety and the weight of justice rested on me. Benjamin handed me the recorder, tucked securely beneath the blanket that covered my baby. I'll be close by, he added. If anything goes wrong, I'll step in. The path to the door felt endless. When I knocked, the old wood creaked, and seconds later, footsteps echoed from inside. The door swung open, revealing Mildred, her face a mix of surprise and fury. You! She spat, venom dripping from her words. Yes, I replied, steadying the baby in my arms. I thought you'd like to know you can't get rid of me or your grandson. Her eyes fell to the baby, and for a fleeting moment, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't joy or concern, but a raw, almost animalistic rage. You should be dead, she muttered, her voice low before quickly regaining her composure. I stepped inside, the weight of her gaze heavy with every step. Mildred closed the door behind us, leading me into the living room, where the air seemed thick with the remnants of her cruelty and manipulation. I sat in a chair, adjusting the baby in my arms as she stood over me, looking down. What do you want, Grace? She sneered, arms crossed, her voice dripping with disdain. I want you to admit what you did, I said, my voice calm, yet stronger than I had ever heard it. I want you to say it how you tried to kill me, how you locked a pregnant woman in that barn to die. Mildred let out a dry, humorless laugh. You think you can come here and accuse me? Do you think anyone will believe the word of a desperate girl? Anger surged inside me, but I fought to keep it in check. No one needs to believe me, Mildred. They just need to believe you, because I know you can't resist bragging about what you did. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing, and I could feel the sharp edge of my words land exactly where I needed them. And why would I brag, Grace? She hissed. For doing what was necessary to protect my family from a parasite like you. Protect your family by locking your grandson's mother up to die. What kind of person does that? My voice rose, my words heavy with pain and indignation. I did what anyone would do to protect what's theirs. She replied, her voice rising almost as if she were justifying her actions to herself. You don't deserve to be part of this family. You don't deserve Billy or that baby. It would have been better if he'd never been born. My breath caught. Her words were worse than I could have imagined, but they were exactly what I needed. Before I could react, the door to the living room slammed open and Wyatt stormed in, followed by the police. Mildred froze her gaze, shifting between surprise and fury. "What is this?" she shouted, but her voice no longer held the same authority. One of the officers held up a wall war while Wyatt grabbed the recorder hidden under the blanket. He pressed the button, and Mildred's voice echoed through the room, confessing everything. "You can't do this!" she screamed, trying to lunge forward, but one of the officers restrained her. "I'm Catherine McCarthy. You have no idea who I am," she spat. "Oh, we know exactly who you are," Bam replied, his voice firm. He looked at me, a glimmer of relief in his eyes, and now everyone else will too. As Mildred was handcuffed and led away, a rush of emotions hit me: relief, anger, sadness, and something harder to define. Finally, that nightmare was coming to an end. But even as I exhaled, I knew there was still something I had to face. When I turned around, Billy stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had just arrived and witnessed everything. It was time for the final truth to come out. The silence that followed Mildred's departure was almost deafening. The house, which had once felt like a maze of shadows, now stood empty, its oppressive weight gone. Wyatt and I remained, my son sleeping peacefully in my arms. Billy, who had left without a word earlier, finally returned. His face was etched with a mixture of anguish and confusion. "She was my mother," he began, his voice trembling. "But I don't recognize her anymore, not after what she did. All she ever said was that she did it for the family, for the legacy. And now I see, she destroyed more lives than she ever built." Wyatt, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, observed quietly. There was something different in his expression, a quiet intensity, as if he were waiting for the right moment to speak. "Billy," he said finally, his voice steady, "you think you know your mother, but there's so much more you need to understand about who she really was, and about me." The air in the room felt heavy. Billy looked at him confused. "What do you mean by that?" Wyatt sighed and moved away from the wall, sitting down in a nearby chair. For a moment, he seemed almost reluctant, as though revealing the truth was both a relief and a burden. "I'm not just the man she destroyed," he said quietly. "I'm her brother." I gasped, the breath catching in my throat. That was all I could manage to say. Billy froze, his eyes widening. "She never talked about me, did she?" "Of course not," Wyatt replied, his voice bitter. "Catherine was always good at erasing anyone who threatened her control. I'm her younger brother. We grew up on this very farm, but I was always the opposite of her. Where she saw power, I saw greed. When I started questioning her decisions, things changed." Wyatt leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice growing more intense. "She framed me, dragged my name through the mud because she knew I wasn't someone she could control. When I was arrested, she erased me from the family history. To you and to the world, I never existed." Billy slowly shook his head, as though trying to make sense of it all. "I never knew. She never mentioned anything about brothers." Wyatt let out a bitter laugh. "Of course not. To her, I was just a threat. But now, with everything that's happened, I knew I had to come back not just to expose what she did to me, but to help Grace. Seeing what she did to you and your family, it was like reliving the past." I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I had just heard. It made sense, in a way. Wyatt's determination to bring Mildred down, it wasn't just about justice. It was personal. "Why didn't you say anything before?" I asked, my voice rising higher than I intended. "Why wait until now?" Wyatt looked at me, his eyes filled with something that resembled guilt. "Because I didn't know if you'd believe me. And because after everything I lost, I needed to prove she wasn't invincible. Now that she's locked up, I can tell the truth." Billy rubbed his face, as if trying to absorb it all. "This changes everything," he murmured. "You're my family, but I never knew. And now, everything I thought I knew about my mother was a lie." Wyatt placed a hand on Billy's shoulder. "You still have the chance to be different, Billy. The chance to build something real, something she never could. Don't let her choices define who you are." The silence that returned wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding. Finally, Wyatt stood, grabbing his backpack. "My part is done," he said, glancing at me, then at Billy. "I'm leaving. But you two have a future ahead of you. Make the most of it." "Wait," Billy said, his voice firm. "You're part of this family, Wyatt. You might not think so, but I want you to know. At least for me, it means something." Wyatt paused at the door, a faint smile softening his tired face. "Maybe one day, Billy. For now, you've got a new life to build. Take care of it. Take care of that baby. That's all that matters." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the soft morning light. As I looked at Billy, I realized that for the first time he seemed free from the lies his mother had woven, free to finally become the man he always wanted to be. As for me, I knew my path would still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I had hope. I looked down at the baby in my arms and felt something new certainty. The past wouldn't define us. This was the beginning of a new life for all of us,